Good morning, and welcome to this recorded sermon coming to you from Mount Vernon Presbyterian Church in Alexandria, Virginia. My name is Bob Malone, and I am the pastor here at this congregation. This morning I'm wrapping up a three-part sermon series titled French Olympians of the Church. I hope you have been enjoying the Paris Olympics, and similarly, I hope you not just enjoy, but are fed this morning as you listen to this sermon as it comes to us from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 21 through 35. As always, listen for what the Spirit is saying to you today. My child, do not let this escape from your sight. Keep sound wisdom and prudence, and they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. If you sit down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Then you will not be afraid of sudden panic or the storm that strikes. For the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, "Go and come again. Tomorrow I will give," when you have it with you now. Do not plan harm against your neighbor who lives trustingly beside you. Do not quarrel without cause when no harm has been done to you. Do not envy the violent, and do not choose any of their ways. For the perverse are abomination to the Lord, but the upright are his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but God blesses the abode of the righteous. Toward the scorners, God is scornful, but to the humble, God shows favor. The wise will inherit honor, but stubborn fools only disgrace. Friends, this is the word of the Lord and the poetry of the faithful. Thanks be to God. Well, if you can't tell, I've been in love with the Olympics for a long time. Actually, since 1972, when in Munich, Germany, Mark Spitz won 7 gold medals, each with a world record. The week after the closing ceremonies, each day, I would have my grandfather time me as I swam laps in our redwood fantasy pool, convinced that I really wasn't that far off, and that perhaps someday I could do the same thing he did. 10 years later, in 1982, when I visited Munich and the Olympic pool, I convinced my fraternity brother who was with me that we needed to rent a pair of Speedos and actually go swimming in that very pool. And we did. Do you remember those Olympics so long ago? How about the 1980 games in Lake Placid, New York, when that young American ice hockey team defeated the 4-time defending gold medalists from Russia, known as the Miracle on Ice? Do you remember that victory for the American team? I have to say that yesterday's gold medal basketball game between America and France was almost as exciting. Go Steph Curry. Interestingly, in 2024, it's not men like Spitz or even Curry dominating the games. It's the U.S. women. Athletes like Simone Biles and Gabby Thomas. Locals, Katie Ledecky and Tori Husk. And the women's soccer team. They won a gold medal just yesterday. American women have dominated this year's games. And for that reason, this morning, I'm wrapping up this series on French Olympians of the church with a woman. So forget Thomas Merton, a Roman Catholic monk, renowned as a tremendous writer and social activist. His autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain, which he wrote at the age of 33, became an unexpected bestseller. And he was passionate about spirituality and social justice. Forget Thomas Merton. We need a French woman this morning. And there's really no doubt who it should be. She's a French saint whose name we all already know, but whose story may not be all that familiar to us. She is Joan of Arc. Joan of Arc lived in the 15th century and is the patron saint of France. Her few years on this earth were full of what she believed to have been divine visions, calling her to help save France from English domination during the 100 Years' War. She brought great hope to the front lines of the French military by continually encouraging French troops to pursue the retreating English. And more than anyone else, Joan helped to ensure the crowning of Charles as King of France. No English king would do. It is believed by many historians that her victories on the battlefield are what paved the way for France's final triumph in that war that didn't end until several decades after her death. Now, from everything I can tell, Joan was not your typical saint. In fact, I often wonder if she was more like Viola Davis in The Woman King. Perhaps you've seen that movie. Because Joan of Arc was a soldier, a warrior, who was not the least bit fearful of battle. Unfortunately, she was eventually captured by the English, put on trial for heresy, and found guilty. And as a result, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake at the tender age of 19. It took 25 years after her death for that verdict to be overturned and for Joan to become a national symbol of French pride. And in 1920, she was canonized as a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. To this day, Joan of Arc is revered as an obedient daughter of the church, an early feminist, and a powerful symbol of French freedom and independence. Every telling of Joan's story reveals that she was endowed with remarkable mental and physical courage, as well as a robust common sense. And she possessed all the attributes characteristic of female visionaries of her time. Extreme personal piety, a claim to direct communication with the saints of the church, and a reliance upon her individual experience of God's presence beyond the confines of the priesthood and the institutional church. In the 1999 movie, The Messenger, Joan is portrayed as a woman who, at least at the end of her life, struggled with the violence of the war in which she believed she was called by God to fight. But we really don't know if that was the case, for sure. I can't believe that she didn't struggle with that, because it's a struggle for people of faith in every age, in every generation. It's a question that I think all of us ask at some point in our lives. When is violence acceptable, if ever? That is the question that the life of Joan of Arc puts before us this morning. In this passage from the book of Proverbs, we're called to a certain type of living. Conduct for the life of people of faith is kind of spelled out for us. And the writer makes it clear that we are to be people of wisdom and discretion, free of fear. And I love this phrase, able to enjoy the sweetness of sleep. We're called to be considerate of our neighbors and not to quarrel. And what I see as one of the most significant verses in the passage, verse 31, we're specifically told to not envy the violent, nor choose any of their ways. I alluded to this calling several weeks ago after the events in Butler, Pennsylvania. And I sought to point out that Jesus' death on the cross, that willing death on the cross, reveals that violence is never the way of God. And that sentiment seems to be encouraged here in Proverbs as well. So, what do we do with someone like Joan of Arc? We're going to dig into it a little bit more next month when we look at Christian nationalism, which, as a little teaser this morning, I will tell you, is going to include an interview with Mike Ongstead, one of our newest members, who many of you do not know very well, but who has a beautiful faith and a brilliant mind. And so I'm excited for you to get to know him as he helps us delve into this matter of violence and the way of Jesus. But Proverbs does a good job already. And the message of Proverbs comes through in other passages. In 1 Corinthians, which we will also read later this morning when we worship in person. That's a passage as well about our witness in the world. And there the writer tells us that we are called to be people who live by the Spirit, by the gifts of the Spirit, gifts of love, peace, kindness, goodness, and self-control. But do we see that? Do we see those gifts in the life of Joan of Arc? She believed that the Spirit was calling her to be a warrior. And so I'm left asking myself, was it really God who was calling her? Was it really the Spirit moving in her life on the battlefield, leading her to this violent warrior-like action against the British? Was it God speaking to her, or was she just dealing with some form of, mental illness? You see, if violence is not of God, then killing can never be the way of God either. So how do we deal with war for example? What do we make of just war theories that have existed in the church for generations? This idea that sometimes, in those instances where war is specifically addressing evil in the world, well, then it's acceptable. Then killing is acceptable. Then violence suddenly becomes acceptable. The theory, the just war theory, suggests that war, if ever fought, should be exercised with great care and concern for the least of these, but it still needs to be accepted. Because, again, sometimes violence is the only option. Clearly, that was the case for Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? One of the greatest theologians of all time. If you don't know his story, he eventually, as a church leader, came to believe that Adolf Hitler needed to die. That was the only way to stop the evils of Nazism and to end World War II. And so this Christian leader became part of a plot to assassinate Hitler. He was eventually caught. The plot was foiled, and Bonhoeffer was hanged by piano wire. But like Joan of Arc, what do we make of his behavior? What would we have done in his situation? Do we believe that there is ever a time when killing is acceptable, when violence is acceptable? And if so, well, where do we draw the line? Rightly, after the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, even the most ardent anti-Trumpers among us, myself included, were very quick to point out that violence is not the way to deal with evil. But is that true? What if someone breaks into our home and threatens our family? Is killing okay in that situation? Is violence acceptable? And even if it is, does that automatically make it right? Does that automatically make it the way of God, of Jesus? Do you remember the story of Andrea Yates, the Texas mother who drowned her 5 children in the bathtub back in 2001 because she believed God was calling her to save them from the evils of hell? I would hope we would all agree that that is clearly not God. That God was not speaking to her at all. Those kind of extreme circumstances are usually relatively easy to spot and to name. But what do we do when the circumstances are not quite as clear? What do we do with those who are claiming to be about the ways of God in ways that seem to defy the way of Jesus? What do we do with people who think God is calling them to behave violently? How do we exercise discernment in such situations? Well, unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that I don't have an answer to those questions this morning. And frankly, I'm not sure anyone does. I'm suspicious of all who claim to have the answers to those questions. Anne Lamott, a great author, has said, "My problem with organized religion is the certainty. The opposite of the spiritual path," she writes, "is thinking that we have God and God's ways all figured out." I wish I could just say that in situations like the ones I've raised this morning, we all just need to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? I wish I was convinced that we could ask ourselves if whatever we are about to do will reflect and further the love of Jesus. That's how we can answer all of these challenging questions. I wish I could do that. But I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure it's just that simple. I want to say that Jesus is the yardstick by which we are called to measure all of our actions. But sometimes, actually more often than I would like to think, the world is not just that black or white. Sadly, or not, the world, faithfulness, are far more gray than most of us would like them to be. Methodist pastor and author Adam Hamilton, in his book Seeing Gray in a World of Black and White, writes that the world is longing for a radical center, not extremes. And this is especially true today, because when it comes to matters of faith, some things are in fact very clear. There's no doubt about that. But other things are not. Faithfulness looks different on different people. And so my message this morning is relatively simple. We need to hold on to our truths very loosely. Very loosely. Some truth is infallible. I will never deny that. All opinions are not equally valid and acceptable. Booker T. Washington once said, a lie doesn't become truth. A wrong doesn't become right. And evil doesn't become good just because they are accepted by a majority. Some things are simply not the way of Jesus. Burning people at the stake, for example. Let's just deal with that one this morning. That's never, I don't believe, the way of Jesus. Ever. Regardless of what you may think or believe about Joan of Arc, about heretics, or even witches for that matter, such a horrific form of death is never, ever the way of Jesus. But there are countless other opinions, other behaviors, thoughts, ideas that are just not that clear. In fact, they're very, very gray. And that means learning to extend grace to one another. It means going back to this morning's passage and doing our best to try to model what it means to be people, striving to do good, striving to avoid doing harm, and to live by the Spirit. By the Spirit, channeling both her gifts and her fruit. Tonight's closing ceremonies at the Paris Olympics are likely going to be as creative and as exciting as the opening ceremonies were 2 weeks ago. We're told that there are going to be incredible performances by more than 100 singers and acrobats and circus artists, all culminating with the extinguishing of the Olympic flame, which, did you know, is not really a flame, but actually just lights and mist. There's even a rumor that Tom Cruise is going to do some kind of a stunt that involves passing the Olympic torch to Los Angeles for the next Summer Games. But whatever happens, we will likely remember more than anything else the athletes. People. Like Americans Stephen Nedoroshic and Cole Hawker. Brazilian gymnast Rebecca Andrade and Ukrainian high jumper Yaroslava Mikula. But there's another guy that I'm going to remember. If you are part of our church family, you know who it is. Peter Lewis, one of our own members, ran the Marathon for You. He was part of 20,024 average people selected from a lottery from all the countries of the world, and he ran that marathon last night. He finished around 3 o'clock in the morning, Paris time, after running somewhere right around 5 hours. Peter inspires me as much as any of the great Olympians. If you know his story, then there's no doubt Peter inspires you as well. And the inspiration is not just for running or for being more physically fit. He inspires me spiritually as well. People of faith do that, don't they? They motivate us, and often without words, but by their actions, they invite us to pursue something more. They are indeed Olympians of the church. Women and men from every age who have left Olympic-sized marks upon our history. They've shaped our identity, and they continue even today to impact our witness in this world. John Calvin, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Joan of Arc, they are just a few. So may we have the courage to learn from their examples and to follow in their footsteps. And to God be the glory. Amen. Friends, have a great week, and we'll see you back here next Sunday morning. Until then, peace.